The Lakota chief saved a virgin from raiders, and the tribe called it a holy union. The cry rose somewhere beyond the tall grass, thin and terrified, carried by the evening wind that rolled across the plains like a warning, and Chief Tahu Redhawk turned his head sharply toward the sound, his horse snorting beneath him as if it too sensed the danger. He pressed his palm to the animal's neck, steadying it before urging it forward, the fading sun painting long shadows across the earth as he rode toward the trembling voice that did not belong to any woman of his tribe. And when he crested a low ridge, he saw her, a young woman stumbling barefoot through the grass, her dress torn at the shoulder, her breaths ragged, her eyes wide with the kind of fear that meant she had been running for her life. She glanced back over her shoulder as if expecting hands to grab her again, and Tahu saw the dust of riders fading in the far distance, the tracks of the raiders who had likely taken more than they deserved before leaving her for dead. And he swung down from his horse without hesitation, moving with the steady purpose of a man who had lived his entire life, learning how to meet danger without letting fear rule him. She did not hear him at first, too lost in panic to sense anyone who wasn't trying to harm her. But when the grass parted and he stepped into her path, she gasped and stumbled backward, nearly falling until he reached out with one open hand. Not grabbing, not claiming, only offering stability, and she froze, breathing like a hunted animal, her eyes darting across his face as though trying to decide whether he was another threat. The wind picked up the eagle feather ties at his braids and the beadwork at his chest, and something in his calm, in the quiet way he held his hand, made her stop shaking long enough to whisper, "Please, don't hurt me," her voice barely holding together. He shook his head once, slow and steady, letting her see the truth before he spoke, his tone low and even. "You are safe now. No man here will harm you." When her knees buckled from exhaustion, he stepped forward just enough to catch her, lifting her with an ease that surprised her, her hands clutching his shirt as though the earth itself had opened beneath her, and he was the only solid thing left in the world. He lifted her onto his horse first, settling her against the saddle blanket, then swung up behind her, the warmth of his chest steadying her trembling shoulders as he guided the horse toward the river trail, where the tribe's camp lay hidden beyond a line of trees. She tried to speak again, something about being taken, about losing her way, about not knowing where home was anymore. But her voice collapsed into tears before the words formed, and Tahu did not rush her, did not press her for answers, only wrapped one arm lightly around her to keep her upright as the horse carried them into the gathering dusk, where safety waited in the soft glow of fires she could not yet see, but would soon learn to trust. By the time they reached the edge of the Lakota camp, dusk had deepened into a blue-violet calm, the kind that softened every shadow except the one trembling in the young woman's breathing as she clung to the saddle horn, and Chief Tahu slowed the horse to a gentle walk so she wouldn't feel jarred or exposed when the first tribal fires came into view. Children playing near the riverbank stopped to stare, their laughter falling quiet as they noticed the torn dress, the exhaustion, the way she leaned against Tahu as though borrowed strength was the only thing keeping her upright, and one of the elders, Grandmother Blue Willow, rose from her place near the main fire, her eyes sharp and knowing as she approached the chief with the certainty of someone who had seen too many wounded girls arrive on too many broken nights across too many years. Tahu dismounted first, then lifted the girl with both arms as if she weighed nothing more than a fallen fawn, and though she flinched when his hands moved beneath her knees, she didn't pull away, a small but powerful sign of trust that did not go unnoticed by the circle of women gathering nearby. Blue Willow touched the girl's cheek, her voice soft as warm smoke as she murmured, "You are not among enemies now, child," and those simple words loosened something inside the girl that fear had held in a tight fist, making her eyes water anew, though she tried to swallow the tears. Tahu carried her toward a lodge near the river, the one kept for those who needed healing or rest, its doorway marked with painted symbols that she did not understand but instinctively felt safe beneath. And as he stepped inside, ducking slightly so her head wouldn't brush the frame, the warm scent of sage and willow bark met them like a quiet welcome. He set her gently on a pile of furs arranged near the center, but when he moved to step back, her fingers shot out and caught his wrist, trembling, desperate, and he froze, not wanting to frighten her further. She whispered, "Please, don't leave me alone," her voice so small it felt like a bruise forming in the air, and Tahu sank to one knee beside her so she would not have to look up in fear, replying softly, "I will stay until you breathe without shaking." Her grip loosened only slightly, and for a long moment she simply looked at him, studying the calm in his dark eyes, the steadiness in his breath, the way he did not demand anything in return for his help, and a single tear slid from her lashes as she finally allowed herself the first fragile moment of safety she'd felt since the raiders took her. Blue Willow entered quietly then, placing a warm bowl of broth beside her, and the girl reached for it with trembling hands until Tahu steadied the bowl with his palm, letting her sip without spilling as the fire outside crackled with soft, steady rhythms. And while the night gathered around the lodge, Tahu remained exactly where she needed him, silent and present, until her breathing eased enough that he knew she had begun, at last, to believe she might survive whatever had been done to her. Morning arrived quietly, with pale gold light slipping through the lodge's seams and settling over her like something gentle enough not to startle. And she woke to the steady presence of Chief Tahu, sitting cross-legged near the doorway, his spear resting across his knees, his posture calm but alert in the way of a man who had not slept so much as kept watch. When she stirred, he lifted his gaze, offering a small nod that was neither commanding nor distant, just steadying. And for the first time she realized he had stayed awake the whole night because she had asked him not to leave. She pushed herself slowly upright, wincing at the stiffness in her limbs, and he spoke softly, careful not to overwhelm her. "You are safe here. No one will touch you. No one will claim you." Those words, so simple, seemed to strike her harder than any comfort she'd received since the attack, and before she could stop herself, tears blurred her vision again, though she turned her face away in embarrassment. Tahu did not comment on the tears, nor did he reach out, recognizing that comfort given too quickly could sometimes feel like another invasion. So instead, he shifted slightly and asked, "What may I call you?" The question startled her. No one had asked with gentleness in years, and she swallowed hard before whispering, "Mira." He repeated it once, carefully, as if giving it a new strength. "Mira." Blue Willow stepped into the lodge, then with warm water, a cloth, and a bundle of soft deerskin garments, greeting Mira with a tender hum before kneeling to gently clean the bruises on her arms. Mira tensed at first, but Blue Willow murmured quietly in Lakota until the tension eased and she allowed the old woman to continue. When Blue Willow offered the new clothing, Mira hesitated, clutching what remained of her torn dress as if it were the last thread tying her to the life she'd had before. But Tahu said in a voice low and respectful, "Clothes do not change who you are. They only remind you that your body belongs to you, not to those who harmed you." And that was enough for Mira to allow the garment exchange, tears slipping silently down her face as she dressed behind a woven screen. When she emerged, she looked startled by her reflection in a polished copper basin. She looked like a girl again, not a wounded thing. And Tahu rose slowly, giving her space but making sure she saw him see her, not with pity, but with recognition. "Mira," he said again, as though anchoring the name to the ground beneath her feet. "If you wish, I will take you to the river today. Not to cross it, not to leave, only to stand where the world is wide and let your breath return." She nodded before she could stop herself, drawn to the way he spoke not in orders, but in invitations, and Blue Willow smiled softly behind her, whispering something in Lakota that Mira didn't understand, though she knew it was meant as a blessing. As they stepped outside together, the sunlight warmed her face, and for the first time since the night she was taken, Mira felt the faint, trembling beginning of something she thought she'd lost forever, a sense of her own name, her own place, and a world where she might stand without fear. The walk to the river followed a narrow path softened by pine needles and framed by tall cottonwoods whose leaves shimmered in the morning breeze like hundreds of tiny voices whispering reassurance. And though Mira kept her eyes low at first, watching the earth beneath her bare feet, she felt the presence of Chief Tahu beside her, not crowding her, not leading her, simply walking at her pace with the steady calm of someone who knew how to let silence do the healing. When they reached the riverbank, the world opened wide before them, a long sweep of water moving slow and glassy under the rising sun, the kind of place that asked nothing of a person except to breathe. Mira stopped at the edge, her fingers trembling as she wrapped her arms around herself. Flashes of the night she'd been taken, flickering sharp and unwanted behind her eyes. The shouts, the hands, the dark. She flinched, and Tahu noticed, but he didn't speak. Instead, he stepped ahead just far enough to kneel at the water's edge, dipping his palm into the cold current and letting it run through his fingers before he said quietly, "Water remembers what it touches, but it also teaches how to let things go." Mira knelt beside him slowly, unsure, watching the ripples chase each other downstream, and after a long moment, she whispered, "I don't know how." He nodded once, as though he'd been expecting that answer, and replied, "Then you begin by not forcing it." Blue Willow's voice drifted from where she stood a little distance back, gathering willow branches, her tone soft and encouraging as she called, "The river does not rush healing. Neither should you." Mira reached toward the water hesitantly, her breath catching when the cold touched her skin, but instead of pulling away, she let her hand stay there, feeling the current move around her fingers, the steady pressure grounding her more than she expected. Tahu watched her subtly, not intruding on the moment, but when she finally whispered, "It still hurts," he answered gently, "Pain is not weakness. It is memory leaving the body." She closed her eyes, letting those words settle over her, and when she opened them again, she realized she was breathing just a little more deeply than before. A hawk cried somewhere up the ridge, and Mira lifted her head, following the sound, surprised by the sudden urge she felt. To keep standing, to keep moving, to not be the broken thing the raiders tried to make her. Tahu rose to his feet and offered no hand. knowing she needed to stand on her own first. But once she was upright, he said, "If you wish, I will walk with you further, or we can return. You decide." The choice startled her. No man had given her one in weeks, maybe years. After a long breath, she said softly, "Let's stay." The chief nodded, a quiet warmth in his eyes, and as they walked slowly along the edge of the river, Mira felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the first fragile flicker of safety growing roots inside her, carrying her forward with every step she dared to take beside him. Night settled over the Lakota village with a softness Mira had never known. The sky a deep bowl of stars stretching endlessly above the circle of lodges, each lit from within by warm firelight that flickered through the seams like tiny heartbeats. She sat outside Blue Willow's lodge, wrapped in a buffalo hide blanket that smelled faintly of sage and smoke, listening to the quiet rhythm of the camp, the distant laughter of children chasing each other before bedtime, the soft thud of a drum as someone practiced a slow heartbeat rhythm, the low murmur of elders speaking in the language she was only beginning to understand. For the first time in weeks, the sounds didn't make her flinch. They didn't remind her of danger. They felt like life continuing, steady and safe. Blue Willow emerged from the lodge with a carved wooden cup of warm root tea and handed it to her with the gentle authority of someone who had raised half the village. "Drink," she said softly, sitting beside her. "Warmth helps loosen what fear keeps tight." Mira took a careful sip, the earthy bitterness grounding her more than she expected, and after a moment she whispered, "I feel like everyone is watching me." Blue Willow smiled, not with amusement, but with a kind of knowing compassion. "They are," she admitted, "but not the way you think. You survived something meant to break you. They see courage you cannot see yet." Mira lowered her gaze, unsure how to hold words that felt too heavy and too kind at once, but before she could respond, footsteps approached, steady, rhythmic, familiar, and she looked up to see Chief Tahu walking toward them, the firelight from nearby lodges catching the edges of his broad shoulders and the paint across his cheekbone from the evening's council meeting. He stopped a respectful distance away, not wanting to startle her, and said quietly, "I wanted to be sure you were resting." Mira opened her mouth to answer, but only air came out. Her throat tightened the way it always did when someone asked her something directly. She stared at the ground, her fingers twisting the edge of the blanket, and Blue Willow placed a reassuring hand over Mira's. "Breathe," she murmured. "Let the words come when they are ready." Tahu's gaze softened. He had seen warriors freeze in battle, had felt fear lock a man's voice inside his ribs. And he recognized the same fight happening behind Mira's trembling silence. "You do not owe me speech," he said gently. "Your presence is enough." Something inside Mira cracked at that. Not painfully, but like a knot loosening after being pulled too tight for too long. She raised her eyes to him, and before she even realized she was doing it, a single word slipped out, fragile and small, but real. "Thank you." Blue Willow froze, then smiled wide enough for her eyes to shine, and Tahu's expression changed only slightly. Just a slow breath and a deeper stillness, the way a man reacts when witnessing something sacred. Mira felt the instant she understood what she had done. Her hand went to her mouth, startled, and then a quiet laugh, thin and shaky, escaped her. It was the first sound of joy she had made since the raiders took her. Tahu bowed his head slightly, not in celebration, but in respect, as though he were acknowledging a ceremony only she could perform. And as Mira sat between the woman who kept her steady and the chief who kept her safe, she realized her voice hadn't returned to please anyone or prove anything. It had come back because, for the first time in a very long time, she believed she was allowed to exist without fear. Morning rose over the village in a wash of soft gold, turning the grasslands into a shimmering sea and painting the lodge tops with warm light. And Mira found herself walking beside Blue Willow toward the council circle where the elders met. She hadn't expected to be summoned when the young runner arrived at their lodge with the message that the grandmothers wished to speak with the woman saved at the river. Her stomach had tightened with the old fear of judgment, but Blue Willow laid a steady hand between her shoulders and said, "When elders call, it is not to wound. They see things long before the rest of us." The council circle sat beneath a stand of cottonwoods older than memory, their branches whispering in the morning breeze as though carrying the voices of ancestors. The elders were already seated, wrapped in robes painted with stories, hunts, storms, births, victories, seasons turning like the wheel of the world. And at the center stood Chief Tahu, hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable but grounded, as if this moment carried weight far deeper than she could yet understand. When Mira approached, the eldest among them, Grandmother Sani, whose hair fell in 2 long braids streaked silver white, lifted her chin and studied her with eyes that saw through flesh and fear alike. "Sit, daughter of the plains," she said, and Mira obeyed, her heartbeat drumming against her ribs. Grandmother Sani spoke first, her voice steady as riverstone. "We have watched the way you walk through this place, quiet, wounded, but listening. A woman who still listens, even after pain, is a woman the spirits can speak through." Mira felt heat rush to her face, unsure how to answer, but the elder continued, "We saw the moment your voice returned. That is no small thing. Fear steals voices. Safety gives them back. But destiny," she tapped the ground with her carved staff, "destiny chooses when words become truth." Another elder, Hawkfeather, leaned forward, the feathers in his hair catching the sun. "The chief did not find you by accident. The river led him there, and the river does not lie." Mira's breath caught. She glanced at Tahu, but he kept his gaze lowered out of respect for the council's authority. Blue Willow squeezed her hand gently, urging her to breathe. Grandmother Sani's focus sharpened. "You must understand something, child. In our ways, a union is blessed not by desire alone, but by signs, by survival, by courage, by 2 lives brought together at the very edge of death. We see such signs around you and our chief." Mira's head spun. I never meant," she stammered, but Grandmother Sani lifted a hand to quiet her. "No one speaks of vows or binding," she said softly, "only of paths that cross for reasons larger than fear. A man who carries death on his shoulders does not kneel beside a wounded stranger unless the spirits push his feet there." The other elders nodded, murmuring agreement, and Mira felt her throat tighten, not with fear, but with something she had not expected, a strange, trembling warmth that felt like possibility. Hawkfeather added, "If you choose to stay, you will not be seen as an outsider. The village will call you Thashina Wiyuka, the woman whose voice returned in truth." Mira blinked hard, fighting tears she didn't want to shed in front of so many eyes. Grandmother Sani leaned closer, her voice low and certain. "The tribe does not call something holy unless it has survived darkness to stand in the light. You and the chief have done both." and as the breeze moved through the cottonwoods and the circle fell silent, Mira felt something shift inside her. Not a promise, not a fate she couldn't escape, but the first quiet understanding that maybe the elders weren't declaring what she must become, but what she already was becoming. The sun had barely slipped past its highest point when the first warning cry rose from the southern ridge, a sharp hawk call whistle that shot through the village like a spark through dry grass, stopping every conversation mid-breath. Mira stood beside Blue Willow, helping to shake out freshly washed linens when the sound hit her, and the blanket slipped from her hands as children were ushered indoors and warriors ran toward the horse lines. She recognized that whistle, not the meaning, but the fear behind it, because it was the same cold wave that had surged through her the night the raiders took her. Blue Willow grabbed her arm gently. "Stay close to the lodges, not the open," she said firmly. But even as she spoke, Mira's eyes had already found Tahu across the camp. The chief was issuing commands with the calm precision of a man born to protect his people, directing warriors to flank the ridge, signaling scouts to take the narrow trail, checking the bowstring of a young brave with a hand steady as stone. When his gaze reached Mira, something in it changed, shifted from strategy to pure personal fear. But he said nothing, only nodded once, silently telling her to stay where she was safe. A distant rumble rose across the plains, hooves pounding against the earth, dust lifting in a faint brown cloud at the horizon's edge. The raiders had returned, those same men who'd carved terror into her bones, and for a heartbeat, Mira couldn't breathe. The world tunneled, the village fading except for the echo of screams she had tried so hard to forget. Blue Willow's hand tightened around hers. "Look at me," she said quietly. "You are not who you were that night, and you are not alone." Before Mira could speak, the raiders appeared over the ridge, 8 men, armed with rifles and crude blades, riding with the recklessness of men who believed they owned fear. But this time, they were the ones who found themselves outmatched. Lakota warriors met them head-on, horses weaving through the tall grass with impossible grace, arrows slicing the air in swift arcs, the sharp sound of impact carrying farther than the raiders' curses. The village erupted into organized motion, women guiding children into the inner ring of lodges, elders forming a protective wall, younger boys carrying water skins to the warriors. Mira stood frozen, breath trembling, until one of the raiders broke through the side, racing toward the lodges with wild eyes, shouting curses in a language she didn't know, but had heard enough to fear. And he was riding straight toward her. Blue Willow shouted her name, but Mira couldn't move. The world had narrowed to the thunder of hooves, the flash of steel, the memory of rough hands dragging her through the dark. Then a shadow cut across the sun. Tahu's horse swept between her and the charging raider so fast the wind slapped her hair across her face. The chief hurtled from his saddle with a force that echoed like a drumbeat, tackling the raider off his horse, the 2 men rolling hard across the dirt in a tangle of dust and fury. Mira stumbled backward, breath breaking, as Tahu struck with the precision of a warrior who fought not for glory, but for lives, her life. When the raider reached for the blade at his belt, Tahu pinned his wrist to the earth. His voice a quiet, lethal growl Mira could barely hear, but somehow understood. "You will not touch her again." And in that single sentence, spoken with a calm that chilled the air, Mira realized something more terrifying than the attack itself. Tahu wasn't fighting as a chief defending his people. He was fighting as a man defending her. By the time the sun dipped behind the hills, the raiders had been driven off, 2 taken prisoner and the rest fleeing into the darkening prairie, leaving behind trampled grass and the trembling silence that always follows danger narrowly escaped. The village moved slowly back into order, elders checking on children, warriors tending to their minor wounds, women lighting evening fires. But Mira could feel the exhaustion settling over everyone like a thin layer of dust. Blue Willow guided her toward the lodge, insisting she rest, yet Mira kept glancing toward the far edge of the camp where Tahu stood alone, wiping the blood from his knuckles with a strip of cloth. He had barely spoken since the fight ended. He had helped secure the prisoners, checked the perimeter twice, and refused even a cup of water offered by one of the young braves. "Go to him," Blue Willow murmured softly when she noticed Mira's restless glances. Warriors return from battle surrounded by people, but still carry their wounds alone. Mira hesitated, guilt knotting in her stomach. "If I hadn't been here," Blue Willow stopped her with a stern look. "Do not claim blame for the violence of wicked men. He would have fought them whether you were here or not." So Mira walked, slowly, her legs unsteady, not wanting to intrude, but unable to ignore the heaviness clinging to Tahu's shoulders. When she reached him, he didn't turn right away. He stood facing the dark plain, the wind tugging at the feathers tied in his hair, his breath steady but too quiet, like someone holding something inside, because letting it out would shake everything around him. When he finally looked at her, the firelight revealed a thin cut on his cheek and dust across his jaw, but it was the expression in his eyes that made her chest tighten. Something guarded, conflicted, almost fearful. "You should be resting," he said, his voice low, rougher than usual. Mira shook her head. "I saw what you did," she whispered. "You risked your life." His jaw tightened, but his gaze didn't leave hers. "I am chief," he said simply. "It is my duty." But Mira stepped closer, close enough to see the way his hands trembled almost imperceptibly. The tremor a man gets only when the danger has passed, and the weight of what could have happened finally lands. "That wasn't duty," she said quietly. Tahu exhaled slowly, closing his eyes for the briefest moment, as if bracing himself against something he had held back far too long. "When I saw him riding toward you," he admitted, "I felt something I have not felt in many seasons. Fear so sharp it broke through every piece of discipline I have." He opened his eyes again, and they were unguarded now, stripped of the calm and certainty he presented to the tribe. "I fear nothing on this land," he said. "Not storms, not enemies, not death. But the thought of you being taken again." His voice cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough that Mira felt the world shift. "That," he finished quietly, "terrifies me." Mira's breath caught. She had expected gratitude, maybe even concern, but not this truth spoken so plainly it vibrated at the center of her chest. She swallowed hard, unsure how to hold such vulnerability, and took a single step closer until her hand lightly brushed his forearm. The contact startled him, just enough for him to look at her as though seeing her in a new light, but he didn't pull away. "Tahu," she whispered, "you saved me twice, but I don't want you carrying all of this alone." For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence between them, full and charged, like the air before a storm breaks. Then, without stepping closer, without taking her hand or making any gesture that might overstep her comfort, he allowed his voice to soften into something he rarely showed anyone. "You will not have to face your shadows alone," he murmured, "and neither will I. And under the deepening night, with the fires glowing and the village settling into uneasy rest, the chief finally allowed himself something he had denied since the day he became leader. He allowed himself to simply be human with her. Dawn rose quietly over the prairie, painting the village in soft gold as smoke drifted gently from the morning fires. But Mira barely noticed the beauty because her thoughts kept circling the same question. What would happen now that the raiders had been captured? When she stepped outside Blue Willow's lodge, she found nearly the entire tribe gathered in a wide semicircle, elders seated at the front, warriors standing tall behind them, young mothers clutching children who stared wide-eyed at her as if she had become something more than a stranger. Tahu stood at the center, his expression unreadable, his presence calm yet unmistakably tense. When Mira hesitated, Blue Willow placed a steadying hand on her back and whispered, "They are not here to judge you. They are here to see the truth." So Mira stepped forward, feeling every heartbeat like a drum beneath her ribs. The prisoners knelt near the edge of the gathering, guarded but silent, and the moment Mira entered the circle, the oldest elder, Red Elk, lifted his carved staff and struck the ground once, calling the meeting to order. "Last night," Red Elk began, his voice deep and steady, "our chief and our warriors saved us from men who rode with evil in their hearts. But the danger they brought was not only for us, it was for the young woman who came seeking refuge." Mira felt dozens of eyes on her and forced herself not to shrink back. Red Elk turned toward her. "Child of another people," he said gently, "tell us now, who were they to you?" Mira swallowed hard, her voice trembling at first, but strengthening with each word as she confessed everything. The men who had chased her from her home, the ones who had cornered her at the river, the way she had thought death was certain until Tahu intervened. The tribe listened without a whisper, the silence heavy not with suspicion, but with a deep, collective understanding of suffering. When she finished, Tahu stepped forward. "These men rode with cruelty," he said, his voice carrying across the camp, firm but controlled. "They hunted a woman who had done them no harm. They crossed our land. They threatened our lodges. They sought to steal someone we had welcomed." Red Elk nodded gravely. "The Great Spirit sees the truth of hearts," he said, "and the tribe sees it too." Then he turned fully to Mira, his old eyes softening. "You stood with courage in the face of shadows. You did not bring danger. You survived it. And for survival born of bravery, we do not turn our backs." A murmur of agreement rose through the tribe, quiet but warm, like wind stirring tall grass. Mira's throat tightened, her chest aching in a way she didn't know how to name. But the moment that truly broke her was when Running Bird, the smallest child in the village, slipped forward shyly and held out a hand-woven bracelet, simple beadwork but crafted with care. "For you," the little girl whispered, "because you are safe here." Mira's breath hitched, tears blurring her vision as she knelt to accept it. The elders exchanged approving nods, and Red Elk lifted his staff once more. "Let it be known," he announced, "that this woman is not a burden, not a stranger, not a curse. She is under our protection." Then, after a brief pause, he added words Mira would never forget. "And she is welcome to stay among us, for as long as her spirit desires." The tribe murmured again, louder this time, the warmth rolling through the circle like a wave. Mira looked up instinctively, and there was Tahu, watching her with an expression she could finally read: pride, relief, and something deeper, something he no longer tried to hide. In that moment, as the rising sun cast a halo of gold behind him, she understood what the tribe had quietly declared. Not just her safety, not just her place, but the beginning of something that felt bigger than fate. Night fell with a quiet warmth, the kind that made the stars feel closer than ever, and Mira found herself standing near the river where everything had begun. The same place where she had once run, terrified through the dark, and now stood steady, breathing deeply as the moon's reflection rippled across the gentle current. She knew Tahu would come. She could feel it in the stillness around her. And when he finally appeared at the edge of the trees, moving with that powerful, quiet grace she had come to recognize, her heart lifted in a way she still didn't fully understand. He paused a few steps away, as if giving her space to leave if she wished. But she didn't move, and when he spoke, his voice was lower than the night wind. "I feared today might bring you pain." Mira shook her head. "It brought truth and kindness I didn't expect." Tahu stepped closer, his expression shifting in that small, subtle way she had learned to read, concern softening into something gentler. "Our people saw your courage," he said, "and I saw it long before today." Mira felt her breath tighten, not from fear, but from the weight of words she had never imagined hearing from him. "I wasn't brave," she whispered. "I was running for my life." "Running can be courage," Tahu replied. "Survival can be courage. Speaking your fear aloud before all of us, that too is courage." She looked away, overwhelmed, watching the moonlight catch on the bracelet Running Bird had given her. "I don't know where I belong anymore," she admitted quietly. "My home isn't safe. My family is gone. And I don't know what comes next." Tahu stepped closer, slow and deliberate, until they stood only a breath apart. "Then stay," he said softly. "Not because you owe us anything, not because we saved you. Stay because you are no longer alone in this world." Mira's heart pounded, her mind racing with 1,000 fears, 1,000 hopes. "But your people," she began, only for Tahu to shake his head gently. "My people spoke today," he reminded her. "They offered you a place without condition, without demand." She swallowed hard. "And what do you offer?" For the first time, Tahu's composure shifted, a shadow of hesitation crossing his features, not from uncertainty, but from emotion he had held tightly for too long. "I offer what I can give honestly," he said at last. "Respect, safety, a life where your voice matters, and—" He paused, breath slowing. "A heart that has not touched another since my wife walked into the next world 3 winters ago." Mira's breath hitched. She had never asked about his past, never pushed, but she felt the weight of his honesty settle like warm earth around a seed. "Tahu," she whispered, but he lifted a hand, not to silence her, but to assure her. "The elders called our meeting a holy one today," he said, "but not because of ritual or law. They said it because sometimes 2 spirits cross paths at the exact moment they are meant to, and when that happens, the tribe listens." The words wrapped around her like a blanket, not binding her, freeing her. She stepped closer, her fingers trembling as she touched the edge of his hand. "If I stay," she whispered, "I need to know I am choosing a life, not repaying a debt." Tahu's voice softened into something barely above the river's whisper. "Then choose me only if your spirit leans toward mine." Mira closed her eyes, letting the wind, the river, the earth steady her. And when she opened them again, the truth settled on her tongue with perfect clarity. It does. Tahu exhaled deeply, not with triumph, but with a relief so profound it seemed to root him to the ground. He lifted her hand gently, as if it were something precious he feared to break, and for the first time since the night she arrived, Mira felt the world settle into place around her. Two paths, once broken, now braided together by choice, not fate, not rescue, not fear. Choice. And in that moment, beneath the silent blessing of the stars, a new life began.